everyone, to episode 6 of Views and Reviews. I'm Jim Hitt. Today I'm got author Ellyn Wolfe, who wrote Grateful for the Color Blue, a memoir. And I want to say happy to have you, Ellyn.
Thank you.
And I've been looking forward to this review for some time now. We'll get right into the questions today. Well, first, let me say this before I do the questions. Ellyn and I met, what must be about almost 10 years ago.
9 years.
Yeah. And she had just started her book at that time, and she joined a reading critique group of mine, and we were fortunate to be there at the birth of her book, and a wonderful book it is, too, I must say. Let me start with the first question. The question every writer is asked: what made you want to become a writer?
I wanted to become a writer because I love words, and I give full credit for that to my dad, who used really colorful, out of the ordinary words in his everyday language. And there are two phrases that stand out from my childhood. I must have been about 7 or 8, and I was sitting at the dinner table, and my dad noticed he didn't have any silverware. So he looked to my mom and said, I need some jewelry. And my mouth fell open, and I went, jewelry? What? And it just struck me as so fun. And then another time, I heard him, he was talking about his hair was thinning, and he said, I'm losing my feathers. So something cracked open inside my head when I heard that. Words were fun. And I saw the world in a whole new way, and I wanted more. And I've continued that with my kids. We have an entire vocabulary that's just ours, some made up and some adapted. So it's words are fun. And that's what really has always been with me since my childhood.
I think most writers somewhere along the way find some kind of value in words that go beyond what those people who are not writers. They don't quite understand the same value in words and the play of words. That's really an interesting story. My favorite writers are always writers who surprise me with their choice of words.
Yes.
Once you decide you want to be a writer, you did study. I think, as I recall, you studied at Harvard, writing at Harvard.
I sure did. Uh, I, Somehow I managed to get into Harvard. And it was when I was in my 40s. A lot of life had passed, and I needed to go back to school. So I got into Harvard and the Harvard Graduate School of Education, where I majored in psychology, because I'm always interested in why people do the things that they do. And this has really helped with character development. But I also took every single writing course I could get my hands on, including one with Ben Bradley Sr. of the Washington Post, and one with the former editor of the literary magazine Horizon, which closed, I think, in '89. But those two experiences were just really powerful for me. But at that time, my life was complicated, and writing a book wasn't on my radar, but it was something for the future. But I think I learned more about the creative process and communicating through the written word when I was writing trainings and presentations in the corporate world. I was in human resources. And so I was writing all these trainings for our employees, and my biggest concern was, how do they keep them from falling asleep? So I figured out what held their attention: interesting language, relatable issues and solutions, humor. But most important was to engage them interactively, get them thinking. And so it was sort of an unconventional education, but it was really effective, and it helped me when I sat down to actually write when I met you. And I joined the writers critique group. And that's when I really began to learn the craft of writing. Sharing ideas at the table is just an incredible experience. Everybody has a different point of view, and it just broadens your perspective. So that's sort of my random education.
Your first book, Grateful for the Color Blue, I know it's a painful subject to talk about, but won't you tell us what drew you to write that first book, which is your first only book at this point? But I know you're working on material. But in terms of what tell us about what the book is about and why you felt the necessity to write it.
Okay, so the full title of the book is Grateful for the Color Blue, Surviving the Loss of an Adult Child. And that kind of says it all. My son was 34 when he was diagnosed with cancer. And at the time, he lived in the West Coast in LA and I lived in Boston. And I felt so alone and so lost. And so I looked for a book written by a parent who had been through something similar, and someone I could share the experience with and not feel quite so alone. But I couldn't find anything. There were plenty of books out there on losing young children or losing spouses, but nothing about losing an adult child. So I knew right then that I'd have to be the one to write it. But it really took some time for me to be able to do it. The title came from my grateful journal, which was a nightly routine I did. I made myself write down 3 things for which I was grateful every night, and the process of doing this sort of shifted my head from, oh my God, life is just so frightening right now, to a place where I could get to sleep and not have nightmares. And so when things got really bad, all I could come up with was, I'm grateful for the color blue, because I do love blue. So I just wrote 3 times in my journal, I'm grateful for the color blue, I'm grateful for the color blue. But the book is also, it has, the book has 2 themes in it, actually, which I almost wasn't aware of until a friend pointed it out. Someone who is very involved in estrangement said, your book is also about estrangement. And I was estranged from my brother for 17 years. And this you'll read about it if you read it. So it's something triggered my reconnecting with him. And I'm really glad I did, because we had things happen to both of us with our children that really bound us together in a very, very positive way. So.
Since you wrote yours, actually, while you were writing yours, 2 other writers, let's see, Joan Didion's daughter died, and she wrote about that.
Right.
And Allende, Isabel Allende's daughter wrote her daughter died, and she wrote a book called Paula, which is about that. But you were in the process of writing yours when those came out. So, you had already started. I mean, but as you were saying, there's not much there before that.
Right, exactly. There are more out there now, but I was one of the first to come out. And Paula, I read Paula, actually. It was already written. I read it, but it turned out to be, her daughter was in a coma and in bed, and she sat at her bedside and told her the family history. And so it was more about
Right.
It was more about that. So I needed something that really got down to the.
Yeah, yours is quite different. Yes, yeah, and it's quite different. And I know you've gotten great reviews on it. And the reviews have been absolutely right on. It's a moving book. I'm gonna make a comment or 2 about that later. But once you started writing it, this is your first book you've ever written. Now you sit down and how long did it take you to write it?
It took a long time. It took a total of, well, let me see. He died 19 years ago. The book has been out for 3 years. It took me 6 years before I could even have enough distance to really think about it in a whole different way. And then it took me, let's see, I think another 6 years to write it. And then it took me a year before I could publish it once it was finished, because I was terrified of really putting myself completely out there.
Well, yeah, and you do that. I mean, in your book, you do put yourself out there. It's a very personal book, and I know there are times when you're reading it in our group and working on it, you had us in tears. And that's not to say it's not a book without hope. It's a book with hope, and essentially how we revitalize ourselves. Anyway,
Mhm.
go on. I know this was a very difficult process to handle. How did you wind up handling this emotionally as you wrote the book?
Not always very well. um, I often had to step away and distract myself, which is why it took so long. I mean, sometimes I would step away for just a day, sometimes a week. There were several times when I had to step away for like 3 months, especially when I was getting into the hard stuff. So I distracted myself with other projects. I rode my bike a lot. I had friends who really supported me and encouraged me. But what really kept me going was writing this memoir. The book was a way to give meaning to my son's death and a way to keep his memory alive by using his and our experience to help others in similar situations. And you probably remember me saying at the critique group, if this helps just one person, then it will be worth it. And that kept me going, and I did. And I also ate a lot of cookies. Sugar therapy is good.
uh, let's just real quickly take the book from the process of writing the book. Uh, Grateful for the color blue. Start with the idea and work its way through all the way to marketing for a second, if you can, just briefly. But how did it go in
Sure. I think what helped me a lot was I've always kept journals as a way to get through tough times. And getting the internal turmoil out of my head and onto the paper is really important. When Rob got sick, out came the journal, and I every day I wrote in it. And it was a way to get some of the trauma out. Um, so that was my basis. But when I retired and moved up to Hemet, it was my first week when I met you, and you asked, what do I do? And I said, well, I'm a writer. And it's the first time I ever said that. I'm a writer. And you said, great, join our critique group. And so I'd read my piece every Wednesday, and the encouragement I got from the group was absolutely wwonderful. Then I'd go home and edit and write another few pages. When I finished writing and started editing, God, I'd write and rewrite. And one day I actually cut the whole thing up. I printed the whole book out, cut it up into chapters, and laid them all out on my dining room table and mixed them around, trying to find a way to make it flow. That took a while, but I finally found something that satisfied me. I had beta readers who were very, very helpful, finding things that I had completely missed. Um, when it was ready to go, I learned how to self-publish on KDP, Kindle Direct Publishing, which is actually a very easy process. So if anybody is nervous about doing that, it's very user-friendly. It took me a year to push the publish button because, as I said earlier, so much of it was so personal and so deep. Um, there was a fear of really exposing myself and my emotions to the world, but I figured, okay, this is hopefully going to help people. In terms of marketing, I published in 2020, right in the middle of COVID. So there were no book release parties, no bookstore readings. I use social media, and I'm a member of a Facebook group called Mothers Who Have Lost Their Sons. And a few grief therapists are using it with their clients, at least that I know about. So I'm sure there are others out there. But honestly, Jim, I am terrible at marketing. I could have done more. I still could do more, but I haven't. But word of mouth has kept my sales strong over the past 3 years. And judging from the 4.7 that I have on Amazon and the really cool letters that I've gotten and reviews I've gotten, I know Grateful is getting out there and it's helping those who need it the most.
I have to say one thing about the 4.7. I think it's wrong. I think it should be higher. But
Well,
I really do.
I mean, there was one person who said it was just, he had lost his daughter just recently, and he read like 2/3 of it, and he said it just brought everything up and he had to stop. So, for him,
Well, I
anyway.
hope he got around to finishing, because ultimately the book is about hope, and in a case like this, like I said, I can only hope that he got through and went back and finished the book. As we write books, we all know this. It doesn't matter even what kind of book you're writing. Somewhere along the way, you start learning about yourself. Is there something you feel you really learned about yourself in writing this book?
So I learned that now that I'm writing a novel, I've learned that writing a memoir is quite different from writing a novel. In the memoir, the story is known, beginning, middle, and end. But in writing a novel, it's more based on, maybe it starts with a personal experience, and then the details sort of come out of the ethers. But what surprised me and delighted me about novel writing is how my characters take on a life of their own. They come alive, and and they go off in directions that I never would have thought of. And that sounds a little crazy, but it's really true. It's almost as if I go off into another realm, where my characters come alive and tell me, no, 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 I don't like your idea. I'm going to do this instead. And I'm just along for the ride. So I've heard this from other writers, and we all grin like crazy when it happens, because it's just so much fun. So I laugh out loud when it happens, and because my character is so much more creative than I am. So, but I've learned two things about myself. One, I'm not a disciplined writer. Quite the opposite. All the writing coaches say, set a schedule and stick to it. But I'm just a very spontaneous person. And it's very hard for me to stick to a schedule. So I know it's going to be a writing day if I wake up in the morning with a sentence in my head, and then I go straight to my computer and I'm lost for the next few hours. And the second thing I've learned is not to stuff my work away in a closet, because I'm a good writer. I used to be a closet writer when I was young. I'd write and stuff it in the closet. And so now when I go back and maybe read a chapter in Grateful, or I read a paper I've written, I'm kind of surprised. I say to myself, did I really write this? This is good. So I've learned that I'm a pretty good writer.
Yeah, it's interesting. I go back and read my stuff, and I think, oh God, that's a good sentence. That's a good paragraph. And then I get to another one and say, oh my God, yeah, I wrote that. How could I have written that? But I have mixed feelings every time I go back on my material. Do you have any advice you would give other writers?
I do. So, and especially for people writing memoir, my suggestion is to really dig deep into your feelings, find your pain, and write it out without holding back. Throw away your fear, your embarrassment, oh my God, what if my mom or dad reads this, or my ex reads this, and dredge up all of those horrors that we have tucked away, because they're too painful to face. But this is exactly what the reader wants, and this is exactly what engages the reader. They're having these feelings too, and they want to know they're not alone in it. So this is what makes a scene, and it makes the entire book come alive and be something that others in the similar situation can relate to and want to read. And so another piece of advice is to recreate the scene using your senses. Put yourself back in the situation, scan through your body, notice what's going on inside you and all around you, and write every detail. So just go deep and pull out those gut-wrenching emotions, and describe them as if you're right there living them again. And then when you're finished for the day, be kind to yourself and do something nice for yourself, because you've earned it.
Yeah, Stephen King said about memoir writing, said the moment you start writing a memoir, you're writing fiction. That may be true. I mean, because we each have our own perspective. But I think what is important is as long as you remain true to your material, that's the real truth in the writing.
Yeah. Well,
And
that's interesting. That's interesting, Jim, because I think because I kept a journal, I was able to go right back to it. And I don't agree with Stephen King on that when writing memoir.
I think it with some it may be true with some. You know, but you're right. The journal helps you kind of zero in on facts, details, even dialogue.
Mhm.
in that respect. Okay, and any last general thoughts about writing you'd like to share? Anything else?
Um, yeah, I think it's about solitude, and I'm a very social person. I'm energized when I'm around people, and I love the idea of it. I love the exchange of ideas and stories. But writing is a solitary experience, especially when writing a memoir. Um, um, but what's gotten me through are the writing groups and the critique groups that I've joined, where we all share our work and we listen to each other. Um, it's praise and support each other, and then go out to lunch together. And so it's a balance. So when you're writing, if you are a social person, find that balance between the isolation and the sociability.
You're right. What are you working on now?
So, right, I'm working on a couple of things right now. One is a companion piece to Grateful for the Color Blue. It's just going to be a small booklet on how to survive stress during grief. So I'm a bit of a stress management guru. I studied with Herb Benson at the Mind Body Medical Institute at Harvard. I was certified as a mindfulness trainer with the Center for Mindfulness at UCSD, and I taught stress management at Fortune 500 companies. So it's only natural that I should combine my stress management skills with my expertise with loss and grief, and produce something that will continue to satisfy my need to help others survive the difficult times in their lives. I have a few children's books sitting in my computer, gathering dust. I don't know what to do with them. But then on a much lighter note, I'm writing a novel about three women from three different countries who meet at a volunteer program in Spain. Each is having relationships problems, and they're bonded together when surprised by a time travel experience in a Spanish castle. So I'm having a lot of fun with that. I'm loving my characters, and I'm loving the different perspectives they bring to the subject of relationships.
Thank you, Ellen. I want to thank you, Ellen, for joining us today for this episode 6. Wonderful interview. And I want to say once again to everybody, this is a terrific book. Yes, it may make you cry, but tears themselves are quite cathartic. And on top of that, it's a book that offers hope. And that's always, to me, what we're looking for in any book, whether it's a novel or a memoir, or that deals with this kind of subject, this deep subject of losing people that we love. And it's the hope that Ellen gives us in the book